This is TWIS, This Week in Science, episode number 410 on April 15th, 2015. Shakespeare, Schmakespeare. I'm Blair Basderich, and today we'll fill your head with prose, hippos, and cannibals. But first...
Disclaimer, disclaimer, disclaimer. The following hour of programming is full of sciencey news what's-its. Small pets, undomesticated children, and feral fish should be kept at a safe distance, as they can sometimes become trapped in the show's electrified netting. This week, like every week, the show you're about to hear is based on the actual world we live in. The stories are about research that was conducted using the scientific method. And what you are about to hear is the result of what was found through the most rigorous form of analysis the world has ever known. Science! If we stopped to think for just 1 second about what we are broadcasting, we would be like every other show out there that thinks for only a second. But we don't think for a second. We think about the show for every waking hour of every waking day, and sometimes when we sleep, we dream of This Week in Science. Coming up next.
We don't have any music today. Sorry, guys. We're going to pretend.
Yeah. So feel free. If you're hearing the music in your head, feel free to dance. Good science to you, Blair.
Good science to you, Justin. Welcome, everyone, to This Week in Science. We have a great show ahead. I have, let's see, what do I have? I have lots of infectious diseases. Ooh, that's always good. I have the latest T-Rex news. I have hippos. And I have a little story about acetaminophen.
Such a great opening line. Blair, tell us something about yourself. I have many infectious diseases.
I do. I have a lot of infectious diseases.
What have I got? I have got the fake spear versus Shakespeare debate, perhaps answered. Why fatty brains are better. I've got a whale of a trail for the longest migration ever. Mass extinction, the end of the world over 200 million years ago, and what it means to you. Also, I've got some terror bird update.
Ooh, terror bird. That sounds terrifying. Well, Justin, why don't you start us off with one?
Okay, so the double falsehood authorship ascertained by a shrinking Shakespeare. This is applying psychological theory and text analyzing software. Researchers at the University of Texas, Austin have discovered a unique psychological profile that characterizes Shakespeare's established works. And this profile strongly identifies Shakespeare as the author of the long-contested play Double Falsehood. So, Double Falsehood, and I think it's also The Distressed Lovers as an AKA title, is an early 18th century play by English playwright Louis Theobald. Theobald claimed it was based on 3 manuscripts of an unnamed lost play by Shakespeare. And it was since lost and presumably destroyed in a library fire, which is very convenient if it was fake, right? His claim at the time when he published this in 17 something was met with suspicion. Accusations of forgery at the time were prevalent. Even the great poet Alexander Pope said this was a forgery and a fakery. This is not to be. You can't try. Theobald is just riding on the coattails of the dead bard to publish a play that he's written in the voice of, but isn't, right? There is some evidence that Theobald may have really had this unwritten transcript, because there's a 16th century registry of from a writers guild kind of a thing, where they're saying we've written this of a similar sounding play or something that the title may have had something to do with the play, that shows it was a play written by William Shakespeare and John Fletcher, who was sometimes collaborator with Shakespeare. But no manuscript of that play is known to exist. So that sounds like anybody could have filled that in. However, that registry, that little registry of the title or the instance of this play being written, wasn't discovered until after the death of Theobald, so it wasn't likely that he was using that somehow in some sort of grand scheme of writing this Shakespeare of the double falsehood. But also interesting, the double falsehood title makes it also that much more intriguing, because then is it real? Is it not real? Is it partly true? Is it really his work? Did he rewrite the work? We don't have the original fake manuscript if it was fake, or lost manuscript. Even that's missing. So the questions remained, whose work is it? Enter Ryan Boyd at the University of Texas at Austin. He's going to bring some science into the debate. So he says, a quote from Ryan Boyd, research in psychology has shown that some of the core features of who a person is at their deepest level can be revealed based on how they use language. With our new study, we show that you can actually take a lot of this information, pull it all together at once to understand an author like Shakespeare rather deeply. So this is they used some computer algorithmy things, but with some very specific things they were looking at based on the understanding of psychology. The study conducted in collaboration with James Penbaker, also at UT Austin, goes beyond examining authorship from the standpoint of word counts, linguistic regularities, that sort of thing, and goes into the author's psychological profile. This research shows that it is indeed possible to start modeling people's mental words in much more complete ways. We don't need a time machine and a survey form to figure out what type of person Shakespeare was. We can determine that very accurately, just based on how he wrote using methods that are objective and easy to do, says Boyd. So Boyd and Penbaker examined 33 plays by Shakespeare, 12 by Theobald, and 9 by John Fletcher, the occasional collaborator with Shakespeare guy. These are 9 that he wrote on his own. How's that? What's that got to be? What kind of collaboration? I'm going to go collaborate on a play with Shakespeare. So I had an idea, Bill. You mind if I call you Bill? Like, what do you do? How do you collaborate with that? So the guy had to be pretty brilliant for Shakespeare to be like, yeah, I want to write with you on this one.
Right.
So the texts were stripped of extraneous information and were processed using software that evaluated the works for specific features determined by the researchers. For example, the researchers' software examined playwrights' use of function words, pronouns, articles, prepositions, and words belonging to various content categories: emotions, family, sensory perception, religion. They had the software identify them themes present in each of the works to generate overarching thematic signatures for each author. They also examined the works to determine how categorical the writing was. Categorical writing tends to be heavy on nouns, articles, prepositions, and it indicates a more analytical, formal way of thinking about things. Research has shown that people who rate high on this categorical thinking tend to be emotionally distant, applying problem-solving approaches to everyday solutions. People who rate low on categorical thinking, on the other hand, tend to live in the moment and are more focused on social matters. That's more really where Shakespeare was coming from. He's sort of done that. By aggregating dozens of psychological features of each playwright, Boyd and Penbaker were able to create a psychological signature for the language used by each of these individuals. Then they applied this information to the double falsehood play to determine who the author was most likely to be. Oh, the results. Yes, looking at the play as a whole.
I was waiting.
The results were clear. Every measure in the play but one identified Shakespeare as the likely author of the double falsehood. Theobald was identified as the best match only when it came to his use of content words, and even then only by one of 3 statistical approaches that they used in the research. When they broke the play down to acts and analyzed the text across acts, they found a little bit more of a nuanced picture. For the first 3 acts, The analysis continued to identify Shakespeare as the likely author. For the fourth and fifth acts, however, the measures varied between Shakespeare and Fletcher. So now we know who Fletcher is. Now we know why Fletcher's the collaborator. Shakespeare's like writing away. Oh, how do I end this? Writing away. I don't know how this ends. Writing away. You know what? I'm sick of this play. Fletcher, could you end this for me? Yeah, sure, I'll figure out something. I'll tie it all together. I'll put a little zinger at the end there, a little reveal, and yeah, I can do that. So that's now I know. Now I understand the collaboration, right? Shakespeare can write. The play will never end. He will never come to a resolution. His people will keep talking forever.
Yeah. So each of these people has basically a diction fingerprint. Yes.
So when they looked at it by act, Theobald's influence on it seemed to be exceedingly minor. So, and then this is going to Boyd, back to researcher Ryan Boyd. Honestly, I was surprised to see such a strong signal for Shakespeare showing throughout all the results. Going into the research without any real background knowledge, this is not a literature hound, right? This is not the English department here. This is psychology. I just assumed that it was going to be a pretty cut and dry case of a fake Shakespeare play, which would have been really interesting. Yeah, that actually would have been more interesting for them if they could have found Theobald's, signature fingerprint throughout the play. Because then they're like, aha, so
that's
different that it's contrasted.
Yeah.
Right? By using measures that tapped into the author's psychological profile, Boyd and Penbaker were able to see that the author of the double falsehood was likely sociable and fairly well-educated, findings that don't jibe with accounts of Theobald, who was well-educated but very rigid and abrasive, not the social butterfly type.
Interesting.
This is, again, Boyd. I've always held huge admiration for scholars who grapple with literature. He says admiration, but he's like, how could you go into a profession that doesn't pay? This is all I know. A great deal of detective work that goes into figuring out who the authors really are deep down, their motivations, their lives, and how these factors embedded in their work. And we just create a computer program that can kind of lay that out for you like automatically. So.
I love this mixture of the arts, psychology, math, and science.
Yeah. No, it's brilliant. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
These findings are published in Psychological Science, a journal for the Association of Psychological Science. Yeah, it does meld a whole lot together pretty beautifully in this story. That's why I was kind of attracted to this story when I first was looking at it. But also that sort of intricacy of that whole. Because I've heard of this play before. I've heard of this play. Actually, this is the first I've heard of it. But I've heard of there being lost Shakespeare plays. Shakespeare plays that we've never heard of. I've heard that there were plays that were written that either were never finished or we just, we never that were burned or lost. That he was just such a prolific writer that there was a lot of content that we didn't get. I've also heard those rumors that, well, Shakespeare wasn't one person. He was an amalgamation of lots of people who were working on these things. Mm-hmm. And the more I've sort of delved into it and looked at it, it sounds like, no, he had apparently, like Fletcher, finishers maybe. He would just keep writing, and one play could very easily meld into the next play, and maybe they're all the same play. Maybe he just sat down one day, never stopped writing, and people had to stop him, take the paper away, and put an ending on everything.
And he's like, I'm feeling sad today. And that one was a tragedy. And I'm in a great mood today. And that was a comedy, right?
Yeah.
That's funny. So that's really interesting. I know when I was a kid that this theory of Shakespeare being a bunch of different people was the prominent theory. When I was in school, I remember it being this big controversy of Shakespeare doesn't exist. He wasn't even a real person. And I'm pretty happy to hear, in the years following, I was happy to hear that he was real because I enjoyed studying Shakespeare when I was in school. And it was always a bummer. It was it was kind of all tainted the entire time I was reading it, that, oh, this guy's probably not even a real person. And it was fun for me to find out, oh no, actually, he is a real person with awesome ideas who had this vast amount of creativity and this wealth in his brain that he was able to put on paper. So it's pretty cool to hear that there might be more of it, and that science was used to figure that out.
So
hey, yeah.
So yeah, so now somebody I've never seen this play, right?
Yeah, I have.
And maybe this is why.
Because it's tinged in controversy.
Yes, it's a controversy that's lasted hundreds of years. That, or maybe it's just not that good. I don't know. Like maybe it's maybe it's not that. Maybe it's not.
If it's not that good, I don't think scientists would have spent time trying to figure out who it belonged to.
Well, that's the thing. The scientists would have anyway. They didn't read the play.
Right.
They don't.
They had the computer read the play.
Majors.
The computer read the play. All right, Justin.
Read the play.
Let's talk about sickness, shall we?
About whatness?
Sickness, illnesses, sneezing and coughing and phlegm and all that good stuff. So when you go to work and one of your coworkers is really sick and they're at work, how do you feel about that?
Totally irritated. Go home. The world can actually move on without you. Don't get everybody here sick.
Right.
And what do they always say? Oh, I'm not contagious anymore.
I'm not contagious
anymore. Just allergies.
Mm-hmm.
That's not really.
Well, there's a couple really interesting studies that came out this week related to that. So one is in ants, a study done in ants looking at what they do when they're sick. So in this case, they were actually looking at a fungal infection in these ants, but what they saw was that ants normally, they groom themselves and then they spend time grooming other ants. And how much they do of each varies. And one thing they saw was that when they infected them with this fungal pathogen, they spent way less time interacting with other ants, grooming other ants, and letting themselves be groomed.
Wow. So you're telling me an ant has more recognition of the social
than Steve in accounting. Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
He's gonna come in with his Kleenex box, his sniveling, his coughing, his sneezing, like it's allergies.
Yes. So these ants exhibited social grooming asymmetry. So the infectious ants received more sanitizing actions than they performed, but that they altogether also interacted less with other ants. So there was a couple things going on. The ants were not grooming other ants when they were sick, so they didn't touch them with their diseased hands. And then they also were getting groomed by other ants, like those ants were taking care of the sick ants. But all of the interactions were less. So they definitely, they kind of isolated themselves when they were infected, so they didn't get other ants infected. So that benefits the whole society when there is a pathogen. Now, it's not all bad news about Steve in accounting with his Kleenex box, because another new study that came out this week says that looking at sick people actually boosts your immune system. Yes. So some researchers, they took blood samples from some college students. Then these college students got sat in front of a slideshow, and the pictures one by one were random things like a chair or a couch or a pair of pants. But then also you might see in one picture a person sneezing, or somebody covered in pock marks, or someone with a rash, or someone with jaundice. And then they took blood samples again. When these people were watching the slideshows, their immune system pumped out cytokines. Cytokines are proteins or peptides, and they're linked with immune system function. But they're all kind of different. They're not all the same thing, but they're all related to boosted immune system function. So they're related to white blood cell production. There's another kind called a B cell that goes after bacteria. But so all this stuff is directly related to being able to fight off pathogens. And so there were more of them after the slideshow. And then they had a control group where some members saw slideshows of neutral images like the couch and the pair of pants, but they also saw violent images to see if that just if stress in general increased these cytokines. But it was only with the images related to illness that there was this burst. So just looking at someone being sick causes this chain reaction in your body to fight off illness.
So what's wild about that too is it's not like you see a sick person and go, all right, gotta dial up the protein response here. All right, I'm gonna have to concentrate a little bit internally, go into myself, and no, it's automatic. The brain, you just see it. You just think you're filtering the information that you're filtering. Oh, that's a picture of somebody sneezing. Glad I don't have a cold. I know Steve in accounting has a cold right now. Glad I'm not stuck with that box of Kleenex. But somewhere in your brain, something is going, okay, there's sickness out there.
Red alert.
We have a visual. We have a visual on sneezing. Launch the proteins. Like there's this whole part of your brain that's actively looking and listening to the world around you and taking action while you just view. Why you just look at a picture? It's amazing.
Yeah, so that's the latest in infectious diseases for you guys. I have more infectious diseases later in the show, but I'll save it.
Well, do you want to go into that time of the show?
Sure, we can do that. We don't have music, so...
We don't have music. We just got the jazz hands. No music.
What time is it, Justin?
I believe it's time for Blair's Animal Corner with Blair.
Yes, and I have a hippo story today. Doesn't happen often, but when it does, you know that I'll bring it into the This Week in Science room. So today, we have an awesome story about hippos, specifically hippo poop. Yay!
Hippo poo.
Hippo poop is so important. And a recent study on hippo poop shows you just how important it is. So this study looked at isotopes in hippo poop. And then they looked at isotopes in different animals in the food chain in the rivers where these hippos live. And they also looked at isotopes in plants on land, plants that would not go into the water to feed these fish. What they found was a direct connection between the isotopes on land and the isotopes in these fish in the rivers. And the connecting piece was the hippo poop, which means...
Wait a second. Wait. What does that mean? Does that mean the hippo is redistributing fish nutrient from the water onto the land, or plant matter nutrient from the land into the water? Where does a hippo poo, Blair? Do they poo in the water or on the land?
They poo in the water.
In the water?
Yes.
So it must be redistributing land nutrients.
Correct.
Into the water.
Yes. So these, by grazing on land, so hippos, they're nocturnal. They hang out in the water, sleeping-ish all day, and then they come out of the water and they graze on land at night. And so they do that, then they come back into the water and they defecate, and then fish eat the defecate. And it's, yeah, go ahead.
Real quick. So, like, the cow,
Uh-huh.
and I know hippos are not cows.
Correct.
But cows have, like, that forced stomach thing going on. What's the grazing stomach situation with the hippo?
They don't have the same kind of stomach as a cow, but they do ferment the grass. So it's different. So the cows ferment it to the extent where when it comes out, it's just garbage. The hippos, just like horses, they don't ferment it as much. They don't have all these different compartments. And so when it comes out, it still has a lot of nutrients in it, which is why animals like horses and rabbits are coprophagous, which means they eat their own poop. It's because there's still a lot of nutrients left in that poop. Now, because the hippos are pooping in the water, it's hard. They can't really sift through the water and get their poop back. Plus, there's so much grasses where they live that usually there's no shortage of food and nothing's messing with them. So they don't have to run away from predators or anything like that. They don't have to worry about a food source. But it's pretty undigested. I can tell you from personal experience, from cleaning up hippo dung, that it looks a lot like hay with some brown stuff.
For anybody who hasn't worked at a zoo or on a farm.
Yes. it looks pretty similar to what they ate.
Cow poo is kind of indistinguishable from what they've eaten.
Cow poo is actually a little more degraded because they ferment it so far and because they digest it multiple times and they chew cud and all that kind of stuff. It's even further than with the hippos.
But if you fed a horse nothing but carrots, it'd be clear.
There'd be carrot chunks in it, probably. Yeah, they don't digest things super well. But so anyway, they trace the organic matter from the land to the hippo to the river fish and insects. And so why do we care? Well, first of all, we kind of assumed that this was happening, but we didn't have the isotopes to prove it. But it's important because in Africa where the hippos live, there's times of drought where there's not a lot of rain. And when there's not a lot of rain, nutrients don't get washed from the land into the river. And so the only connection of nutrients on land to the animals in the river is hippo poop. So it shows us how important hippos are. And with drought increasing due to climate change, and then also hippo populations dropping. They're not threatened or anything, but there's definitely less hippos than there were. That's going to affect the natural processes that the hippo poop is part of that brings these nutrients into the rivers.
So, Blair, are you suggesting that it may be beneficial for California fish rivers to introduce the hippo into the California waterways?
It's interesting you should bring that up because there was actually a story a while back where they had recovered a journal where they had wanted to somebody tried to introduce legislation to bring hippos to America during the Great Depression. They wanted to bring hippos here to serve as basically easy meat that could live in areas that would not otherwise be inhabited by farm animals, like the bayous of Louisiana, for example. It did not get very far, but there was that legislation.
And it's too bad, too, because as we've often talked about in terms of preservation of species, nothing guarantees you a spot in the future of this planet like becoming a domesticated animal.
Well, the hippos wouldn't have been domesticated. You can't domesticate hippos.
Oh, Blair.
You can't.
You don't trust the American ability.
America.
We'd have done it. We had cowboys who still around during the Great Depression who would have gone out there and wrangled up the hippos. They'd have slapped the saddle on the back of one of those bad boys, and over time they'd have broken them.
I'm gonna go with no. Anywho,
What is it?
Uh,
More hippos kill people than crocodiles kill people.
yes.
Alligators kill
Yes.
people in Africa.
Yep. Yep. They are the most deadly animal in Africa.
Mm.
Yeah.
More so than lions, right?
Yep. They
Yeah.
kill over 200 people a year, hippos.
Wow.
So that was, I had to bring up that. Next thing, speaking of animal diets, there is some interesting news out this week about our friend, the T-Rex. Did you hear about it, Justin?
Yeah. Did we do this story already, or did I just hear it somewhere else?
No, I think TWIS did an interview about it, and it was all over the internet. So I just wanted to touch on it. I'm sure all of our listeners heard about it at length. I just wanted to mention it because I do think it's notable. So a T-Rex, actually a Tyrannosaur family member called Daspletosaurus was, a skull was discovered that had all sorts of scar damage all over its skull. And looking at the damage, there's a couple things that come out of that. First of all, it looks like it was another member of the Daspletosaurus that inflicted the damage, but that it also doesn't look like it killed the dinosaur.
Oh.
So he continued to live after that. What it looks like is that two different types of things are happening with these guys. Most likely there is intrasexual selection. So the males are fighting with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, there's some cannibalism. Now, with an animal of this size, you would assume if they eat meat, they're cannibals. That's kind of how it works in the animal kingdom. Cannibalism's not that weird. So paleontologists kind of assumed that already. What they didn't assume was that there was any sort of fighting between them that didn't result in death. And so that's the part that's kind of interesting. So it wasn't a huge kind of eye-opening find, but it was definitely neat to see affirmations that these guys fought with each other and that was a regular occurrence and that it didn't kill him either.
So I still don't get the cannibalism thing. Now I can get that. Okay, I would take away from this they fought over maybe mates or territory or hunting territory and that sort of thing, and we've kind of sussed out that there were likely more really scavengers than hunters, and perhaps that could lead to a little bit of cannibalism here and there, but I don't know. What's the evidence of cannibalism here?
So,
and the thing I'm thinking of, there was the egg stealing dinosaur. Well, I can't remember what its name was, but it was this dinosaur that was thought to cannibalize the young because they found one that looked like it was had a bunch of eggs in its belly. Right. Well, what it turned out to be, it was a nesting dinosaur, and they've since discovered that it wasn't. The remains they found weren't of a dinosaur that had just ingested a whole bunch of dinosaur eggs of its own kind, but was in fact nesting. It had been sitting on a nest when it died, and under mudslide or whatever the heck happened.
Right.
And that's how it was found preserved, and so that got sussed out later.
So it doesn't say in here exactly how they know, but the conclusions they drew from this specimen was that it had a non-deadly encounter with another member of the same species, and then after it died, some of it was consumed by a member of the same species. It doesn't say in the article how they figured that out. I would assume there'd be some sort of damage to another part of the body that indicated that something with teeth that size was biting on it. I'm not exactly sure. I can get back to you maybe after the break.
And that poor dinosaur. I mean, what a life cycle. When you're young, your own kind are picking on you, and then apparently at the very last stage of life, they're literally eating you. That's no way to have lived.
Yeah, it's a rough world out there for any wild animal, and Any meat is meat. Meat is meat, you know? So, all right. So on that amazing upbeat note, we're going to move to the break. Stay tuned for more This Week in Science. Coming up next. And again, I don't have music. Apologies. So I'll move straight to the ad. TWIS has merchandise you might enjoy. Head over to TWIS.org, TWIS.org, to buy some of our swag. We now have a link on our website that goes directly to our Zazzle store. So go to TWIS.org, click on the Zazzle store link in the menu bar to start buying now. Buy a hat, buy an apron, buy a mug, whatever you like. TWIS is supported by listeners like you. Your donations pay for our hosting, bandwidth, contractors we need to hire, and fun things we try to do for the show. We appreciate any amount, $2, $5, $10, $100. You make this show possible. We currently accept donations a couple of ways. First, we have PayPal donation buttons on each show page on our website, www.twis.org. Or second, we have started a Patreon account at patreon.com/thisweekinscience, which is kind of like Kickstarter for media producers, where you can get stuff in return for your donation. Whichever your preference, go to the website, listen to the most recent episode, comment on the show, and make a donation. Can't afford a donation? We can always use your help to get more people listening to and watching TWIS. Use your social media and social networks for science and tell people to tune into TWIS. Just imagine if each of us tells 5 of our friends about TWIS, that we will start a science revolution. Thank you for your support. We couldn't do it without you. Okay, so while we're waiting for Justin, I'll tell you guys a fun little story. So the latest uses for 3D printers. Printing flowers. They don't smell very nice, but they are used to figure out how pollinators work. And so the most recent use was looking at hawk moths. You might recognize a hawk moth from Silence of the Lambs, the cover. But these big moths have a specific preference for certain flowers. And in order to figure out exactly what that preference was, before, scientists would either have to breed specific plants, which means they could only study flower shapes that were found naturally, and it would take many generations to get what they were looking for, or they actually had to make flowers by hand from paper mache. Time-consuming, fragile, and then it's difficult for people to be very scientific about it because it's really hard to replicate. You can't make the exact same paper mache flower time and time and time again, and then you can't have somebody make the exact same paper mache flower across the country time and time again. So what this new group of scientists from University of Washington has done is they have been able to use a 3D printer to make artificial flowers. That way there's no scent, there's no texture difference. All they can look at, they can just look straight at shapes. And so they were able to test 2 different shapes of flowers with these hawk moths. One that was kind of like a trumpet or bell, and the other was a flat disc with a hole in the center. And then they put sugar water into the center of each of these different shapes of flowers. And they found that the hawk moths preferred the trumpet-shaped flowers. And they did that by having these 3D printed flowers on a grid, and they let the hawk moths go for 5 minutes, and they compared how many of each flower shape the moths emptied. And the reason that's interesting is that these hawk moths are really unusual. They have a really long proboscis or nose type thing, and they're nocturnal. And those 2 things together make their life pretty hard. It's dark, it's hard for them to see, and the way they say it in the study, Their long proboscis is as if you had a garden hose twice your height in length in front of your body, and you had to stick that garden hose into a hole that's barely wider than the hose itself.
Well, now you're speaking my language.
So, if it's trumpet shaped, that means if you get it anywhere near the flower, it kind of slides in there naturally. But if it's disc shaped, it's a lot harder to get to that hole in the center where the nectar is. So it makes sense that that would be the preferred shape. And so 3D printing has allowed us to figure out that that's exactly what they're going after, and it has nothing to do with anything else that could be a confounding variable, and that they can make all these flowers exactly the same. So by learning more about our pollinators, obviously pollinators are integral to the future of humans because they're what allow us to eat. So it's important for us to know how pollinators respond to these different variables. So 3D printing has allowed us to make plastic flowers to study these pollinators. So I thought that was really awesome. What do you got, Justin?
The end of the world took place 252 million years ago.
But the world's here now, Justin.
Yeah, well, I'm just talking about the life on the planet. The life on the planet. Well, not all of it. We're here, so something survived. But we don't know what the world may have looked like. This was a pretty massive extinction event. 252 million years ago. 90% of marine species, not just marine life, but marine species died off. Can you imagine what the oceans would look like if we had 10 times the diversity that we do now?
Yeah.
We had animals living on land. 2/3 of those died out. It happened when the Earth's oceans absorbed huge amounts of, wait for it, carbon dioxide from volcanic eruptions. This apparently changed the chemical composition of the oceans, making them more acidic. And this, they say now, is what led to the catastrophic consequences of life on Earth. The study, coordinated in the University of Edinburgh, first to show that the highly acidic oceans were to blame. Findings are helping scientists understand the threat posed to marine life by modern-day ocean acidification. The amount of carbon added in the atmosphere that triggered the mass extinction was probably actually greater than today's fossil fuel reserve. Like, this was a massive period of volcanic activity. However, what's also interesting is even though there was much more carbon being emitted at the time, what is similar is the rate at which the modern emissions are sort of rapidly being driven into the ocean. So there is a pretty significant correlation. There was much more, but the rapidity, the speed at which the acidification took place isn't all that unlike what's happening right now. Mm-hmm. This is the Permian-Triassic boundary extinction. It took place over a 60,000 year period, and the acidification of the ocean lasted for around 10,000 years. These are time frames us humans have hard times really, truly comprehending. So yeah, they just tied it all together that this was what really led to
the end is coming.
Right. So it's the end of the world, everybody. Just so you know. But it's going to take place over 60,000 years. Well, at this rate, because we're doing it a little bit slower than then, it might be over 100,000 years before the mass extinctions.
We're not doing it slower than then.
So smoke them while you got them.
We're actually doing it pretty fast. And I would not say smoke it while you got it. I will say that some stuff survived, and so that's something to keep in mind.
Yes.
I know
Be
that
one of those.
I know that jellies are an animal that's been around for a very long time, and they actually prefer acidic oceans. And that's one thing that we're actually kind of worried about is jelly blooms on the rise. So too many jelly blooms basically just means there's areas where animals can't live because there's jellies everywhere. So
On the other hand, it may have
Yeah.
been a diet of jellyfish that allowed whatever was left to make it here.
the problem is jellies are over 90% water, so it's kind of difficult to stay alive eating jellies. But all this shows us is that ocean acidification is no joke, and it is just add it to the list of reasons to cut down on carbon dioxide.
Ed from Connecticut asks in the chat room, is there greater diversity near the coast or the deep ocean? And I don't know the answer. Maybe you do, Blair. I don't know the answer. I would assume
it depends.
You'd have to say deep ocean because there's just more of it.
Right. So it depends on if you're talking about per meter squared, you could say. It depends because along the California coast, for example, it's one of the most biodiverse places in the world because we have cold water coming up along the coast, bringing with it nutrients, and that brings a lot of animals. But in other areas, like along the equator, biodiversity is actually pretty low everywhere that isn't a coral reef because there's almost no nutrients in the water. So it depends.
You know what else we have along the California coast?
What?
The North Pacific gray whale migrates down along the Pacific coast.
Do you have a whale song for me?
Well, this is kind of interesting. So this is the gray whale was on the brink of extinction. There's two species. There's an eastern and a western gray whale, and they were both on the very brink of extinction due to over whaling from our heathenistic whale lamp whaling past. They slapped a couple tags on some of these Pacific gray whales, and they found that they actually travel to the area of the eastern whale. So they found that these whales had a migration track, a round trip migration track of 14,000 miles, all the way from far up northern Russia down to Baja California and back. So in this study, the part of what they're saying is they're sort of wondering now, okay, so we've got this western gray whale that's still severely endangered. There's, in the hundreds of these things alive, right? And the eastern whale, they've gotten the population up to like 18,000. I mean, the population is really rebounded. So now the question is, are these really distinctive species? Because now we're finding that they can interact. You've got this population of gray whale that does have an extraordinarily long range migration pattern.
Right. So now we get to play the age-old question.
That group of whales. What?
Now you get to play the age-old question. What's a species?
Yeah. So it's parsing. So it is parsing, and my concern is from this study that the reason they may be parsing it may be out of a desire to hunt the whale wherever they find it, or to ignore the fact that this whale has to pass through. We had lost like 10, I think, in a year to like Japanese shipping nets, fishing nets. They go through oil territories through Russia. So there's like all these people who want to create regulations to help protect the gray whales migration route. But now they're saying, well, wait, maybe it's just the same as an eastern whale. Some of them choose to go on this long trip. So there's a little bit of, but that's an amazing migration. 14,000 miles. That's the longest documented, of course. for any non-human mammal.
Right. Any non-human male.
Any non-human male. Not any non-human mammal. Also, we were talking about the end of the world.
Mm-hmm.
The end of the world may be close upon us, but the end of the universe may be further out than we had predicted. This is a study of supernovae, exploding stars. Perhaps, according to this study, we don't have them nailed down exactly as uniformly as we thought we did. So what we kind of had thought was when this star goes supernova, it does so with a certain luminosity. Right, so we're gonna put this in the light bulb category and say when a supernova goes supernova, it's a 100-watt bulb. And so therefore, anytime anywhere in the visible universe there's a supernova event, we can assume it's a 100-watt light bulb. And by how bright it is, right, we can tell how far away it is. Because if they're all 100-watt bulb, the further away it is, the dimmer it is, yada yada. So this is a team of researchers, astronomers, discovered that the type 1A supernova, which has been considered to be so uniform that cosmologists has used them as a cosmic beacon to plumb the depths of the universe, actually have different populations among them of different luminosities. We found that the differences are not random, but lead to a separating 1A supernovae into two groups, where the group that is the minority near us are the majority at large distances, and thus the universe, when the universe was younger. This is Milne, an associate astronomer, UA's Department of Astronomy and Stewart Observatory. There are different populations out there, and they may not have been recognized. The big assumption has been that as you go from near to far, type 1A supernovae are the same. Does not now appear to be the case. The discovery casts new lights on the currently accepted view of the universe expanding at faster and faster rate, pulled apart by a poorly understood force called the dark energy. This view is based on observations that resulted in the 2011 Nobel Prize for Physics. So it's kind of interesting. It says here, okay, the Nobel laureates that were awarded the prize discovered independently that many supernovae appeared fainter than predicted because they had moved farther away from the Earth than they should have done if the universe expanded at the same rate. This indicated that the rate at which the stars and galaxies move away from each other is increasing. In other words, something has been pushing the universe apart faster and faster. The idea behind this reasoning, Milne explains, is that 1A supernovae happen to be the same brightness. They all end up pretty similar when they explode. Once people knew why, they started using them as mileposts for the far side of the universe. The faraway supernovae should be like the ones nearby because they look like them. But because they're fainter than expected, it led people to conclude they're further away than expected. And this in turn has led to the conclusion that the universe is expanding faster than it did in the past.
Mm-hmm. Which means the universe is going to end sooner.
Well, not end, but just get so far away that at some point you could look up into the starry night and see void. Right?
That's going to be a long time away. So
we won't even be, our sun won't even be lit. Our sun will be darkened by then.
It'll, nah.
Long ways off.
Yeah. Nice. Oh my gosh.
So according to these observations, though, you might need to take another look at the rate of the expansion of the universe. Is it really expanding like we think it is? And it doesn't get away completely. So okay, since nobody realized that before, all these supernovae were thrown into the same barrel. But if you look at 10 of them nearby, those 10 are going to be redder on average than a sample of 10 faraway supernovae. The author concludes that some of the reported acceleration of the universe can be explained by color differences between the two groups of supernovae, leaving less acceleration than initially reported. This would in turn also require less dark energy than currently assumed. So less mysterious unknown stuff. in the universe. Doesn't get rid of it. Doesn't say we're not expanding, but says it might not be at that rate that you thought it was. And that rate, as I've talked about a little bit on the show before, is actually pretty small on the physical scale. It's kind of super tiny over really super vast distances. The thing is, there's so many magnitudes of super vast distances in the universe. Those little expansions turn into a really big number when you calculate everything together.
You know, this really hurts my head. So I'm going to reach for the acetaminophen.
Oh, that's always a good plan.
But you know what? It's more complicated than it was before because acetaminophen might be diminishing my joy of life. Yes. So previous research has shown that acetaminophen dulls bad feelings as well as physical pain. So it could help with stress or anxiety, stuff like that. That was a previous study. This new study out of Ohio State shows us that it lessens pretty much all emotion, positive and negative. So, and this is keeping in mind about a quarter of the population is taking acetaminophen in some doses in a given week. That's a lot of people on this stuff to not know all of the side effects. But so in this study, they took students and they gave them either 1,000 milligrams of acetaminophen or a placebo. They waited 60 minutes for the drug to take effect, and then they viewed 40 photographs. And it was a very specific database of photographs from the International Affective Picture System. So these are pictures that are supposed to either spur or not spur specific emotions. So they ranged from extremely unpleasant, like crying malnourished children, to neutral, a cow in a field, or to very pleasant, like young children playing with kittens. And after viewing each photo, they were asked to rate how positive or negative the photo was on a scale of -5, extremely negative, to extremely positive, which was +5. Then they were showed the photo again and asked to rate how much the photo made them feel an emotional reaction, from 0, little or no emotion, to 10, extreme amount of emotion. And what they found was that participants who took acetaminophen rated all of the photographs less extremely and had less of an emotional reaction. They had lower highs and lesser lows, basically. Everything was muted. So, for example, a photo that had an emotion response of 6.76 on average with people on the placebo saw about 5.8 on people with acetaminophen. That's a pretty big difference for an emotional response. So what this shows us is two things. One is that acetaminophen has a response on all of our emotions for everything, good and bad. But it also shows us that it's possible that everybody has a different emotional scale. And so even without acetaminophen, different people might range things differently. So some people might be more sensitive to life events, good or bad, and that is more likely to be linked to whether they're vulnerable to bad events. So if you have really high highs, you're likely to have really low lows also. So that's interesting. But maybe that means that if you are very tense, you could reach for some acetaminophen and it might help, potentially. We're not condoning that, but it could work. There might be clinical trials now for acetaminophen as a anxiety reducer or something of that nature. So it's pretty interesting.
I wonder if it could be useful in jury trials.
How so?
To keep the jurors just a little bit less reactionary to the arguments. So they just wouldn't be as emotionally or like affected.
Is that something you want? I feel like that'd be something you want if you were the defendant, but not necessarily if you're the prosecutor.
Think of it from the defendant's perspective, of course. No. But I mean, so as opposed to getting caught up in an emotional argument, still maintaining a little bit of separation from the emotional aspect and enabling you more to concentrate on the facts of the case. Right?
Maybe.
What's actually in evidence.
Someone in the chat room asks, what's acetaminophen? It's the main ingredient in Tylenol. It's also in a lot of cold medicines, and it's in a lot of different medicines that are prescribed, but most commonly it's Tylenol, or it's in things like NyQuil and DayQuil, stuff like that. It's an interesting way to think about it. Hey, Justin, do you want to hear another way that nicotine is bad for you?
Not really. So
yeah, well, you're going to hear it anyway. So nicotine increases compulsive alcohol consumption.
That's ridiculous.
In a study, the researchers, some researchers were looking at rats. And they started with 2 groups of rats. Both were given access to alcohol to establish a baseline of how much they would want to drink just before anything else. They drank a little bit, the equivalent of about 1 to 2 beers for a human, but they stopped before showing signs of drunkenness. That's the baseline. Then the researchers used alcohol vapor to induce alcohol dependence on one group of the rats. Dependence took about 2 months to develop in these rats. And then in subsequent tests after that, where alcohol was freely available, they were drinking the equivalent of a 6-pack of beer for a human and had blood alcohol levels close to 3 times the legal limit for humans. The second group of rats were exposed to both nicotine and alcohol vapor together. These rats developed alcohol dependence way faster, in 3 weeks. And this is the most rapid escalation of alcohol drinking they've ever seen. And then these rats were drinking the equivalent of a 6-pack after just 3 weeks. So then they offered all of the rats alcohol with a bitter component, quinine, to see if they could stop the rats from drinking. And most rats decreased their alcohol consumption to avoid the bitter taste, but the nicotine-exposed rats kept drinking. That means their behavior was compulsive, much like alcoholism in humans.
But if you were able to hang out with the rats, talk to the rats, you may find that those rats were actually the more interesting crowd. They were the more fun rats to.
That may be true. They also looked at the rats' brains, and they looked at pathways for stress and reward. And they showed that the nicotine activates stress, and then the alcohol activates the reward system and calms the stress system after the nicotine. So there's definitely a connection between these 2 pathways. There's a connection between these 2 substances.
Yeah, and they both affect dendrites in a sort of complementary way in the neurons. So there's a long history of these 2 being hard, because these 2 addictions do tend to go together, and they're both mutually difficult to kick.
They're both pretty hard, but the idea is that now potentially, since they've located these pathways, they can try to find compounds that will specifically inactivate the neurons responsible for the stress and reward related to these things. But this is just proof that there is a direct connection between these 2 addictions. So the nicotine definitely made the alcohol addiction much faster. So something to keep in mind. What else you got, Justin?
Terror birds.
Terror birds.
So the terror bird was discovered a little while ago. We reported on it in this show. This was a bird that could be as much as 10 feet high, 10 feet tall, walked on 2 feet, flightless, carnivorous, hooked beak, big all flesh-eating carnivore, top predator in South America some low time ago. They've made a new discovery, a little smaller version, a little cousin of the terror bird. In this discovery, they found 90% of a skeleton that was, as they phrase it, exquisitely preserved. The new specimen also reveals details of anatomy that are rarely preserved in our fossil records. This included auditory region of the skull, voice box that had the complete trachea, bones for focusing the eye, which is weird because I guess I didn't realize there were bones that were used in focusing eyes. Complete palate, allowing for an unprecedented understanding of not just the sensory capabilities, how they could hear, but also perhaps the sounds that this bird could make. What they found for a predator, I thought was really interesting. Seems to indicate that they may have had a narrow, low vocalization frequency range, probably intra-specific acoustic communication, prey detection. So they had this very low, rumbly type voice. But their hearing may not have been that great, which I think is really weird for a meat-eating predator, unless this wasn't a top predator, but more of, as we've been learning about T-Rex, more of a scavenger. You know, that hooked beak does really well for scavenging, looking for things that already are dead, chasing off whatever else was going to eat it and eating it yourself. But this species, it's a shrimp. It's a shrimp compared to the 10-foot tall terror bird. This one's only 4 feet tall. Lived in Argentina.
Only 4 feet tall.
Million years ago.
Yeah, that's only 4 feet. That's very interesting. I think that if they're scavengers, that totally makes sense. They don't need to hear very well. They just need a really good sense of smell. But it also makes sense if what you were talking about, if they have the kind of the low frequency, it doesn't all have to be hearing. It can be sensing in their feet, the vibrations, or in general, it just doesn't have to be as intense. Mm-hmm. It's pretty interesting that we can learn about an animal's vocal abilities from their skeleton that is really old.
Yeah.
That's a wild thing to figure out from some fossils.
Yeah, it seems that, I mean, they're predicting that this bird could hear not as good as the modern bird. Mm-hmm. So the modern bird has evolved for better hearing. Mm-hmm. But then I sort of wonder what the range was, because if their vocal range is this really low frequency range, you would assume that their hearing could hear, of course, that really low frequency mm-hmm. range, right? Because otherwise, what's the point? You can't talk to your fellow bird. You can't alert them of anything if everything you say they don't have ears that can hear it. And so maybe there's something in that low register mm-hmm. that's really well adapted for finding the prey that they were after.
Or maybe the low frequency scares their prey out of holes or something like that. That's also possible, that it could be an interaction with another species and not an interaction with their own.
Yeah, there's that too. This is fish oil, fatty acids. UC Irvine scientists found that fatty acids are vitally important to the developing brain. Study today, which today would have been, it was today. Study today, Journal Neuroscience, neurobiologists report that dietary deficiencies in the type of fatty acid found in fish and other foods that can limit brain growth during fetal development and early in life. Findings suggest that women maintain a balanced diet rich in fatty acids for themselves during pregnancy and for their babies after birth. They did this study on frogs.
Frogs.
One of the interesting things about frogs is that the tadpoles are going through their fetal development and everything outside of the frog. They're kind of translucent. They're easy to study. They could actually tell how the neural tissue is developing. And what they did is in the study, which used female frogs and tadpoles, they were able to show how DHA deficient, and that's the docosahexaenonic acid. It's what comes from the fatty acids. They found that those that were deficient had poorly developed neurons and a limited number of synapses. When they changed the diets to include a lot more of the fatty acids, went right up to the proper level. The neural and synaptic growth flourished, returned to normal in the following generation of tadpoles. So it was in the mother that they did the study. The tadpoles were the result in both directions.
So you're saying if I'm pregnant,
eat fish.
I should eat healthy?
You should eat fish. So it's one of those weird things, though, because they tell women quite often avoid seafood.
Right.
You know, because it may have mercury, right?
Certain seafood.
So you can do supplements. You don't necessarily have to go out and eat fish, but you don't want to. You want to get these normally fish oil fatty acids somewhere into the diet.
It just sounds to me like if you have a balanced, healthy diet, your child will be healthy.
Well, but you got to define that, and
well,
and
everyone
honestly,
knows fatty acids are important.
Blair, when you become pregnant, you more than anybody are going to want to create the most positive, enabling in utero environment for your offspring. Right. Which isn't how you think about your day-to-day balanced diet. Right? We don't go to we go through the I'm hungry and haven't eaten, what's convenient, what's quick, what's easy. Yeah, I generally want to have a balanced diet. Over a week or maybe a month, I will have a balanced diet. I'll eat a lot of meat over here. I'll go into a little vegetarian frenzy over there. And then by the end of a month, if you add it all up, they would look balanced. But in the period of being pregnant and having this human being who's relying on you for all their nutrients, you're kind of focused on trying to do. And so this is one of the things that brain development is kind of tied to the oil fatty acids that are coming in fish. Don't be afraid of the fish. Last story for me, at least. I don't know. Do you have more?
I have one more, but you go ahead.
This is my last story.
Okay.
Video games. This study, for those of you who have been lifelong video game fanatics, you don't need to be told. You've lived the experiment. But here's the study. Video games can. I'm gonna mock this study because the study's mocking itself. This is out of Penn State. Video games can power up from merely fun to meaningful experiences. It may be game over for critics who claim that video games are nothing more than a fun diversion. Team of researchers, why am I doing that? Suggests that many games can be meaningful entertainment experiences for players. Basically, I'm not even going to read this whole study. I'm not even going to read it. They went and looked into it. They took feedback from people who are playing video games. And yes, the video game industry and culture has progressed to the point that people can have a meaningful experience, a takeaway from a video game, much in the same way that they could have a takeaway from a really good movie or a really finely crafted piece of literature. They can think more about humanity, spirituality, their place in the world. They can understand courage and sacrifice and all these big concepts in a video game just as they would any other media of communication. Right. And part of this too is this is one of those things that always is in the back of my mind. One of the things about the video game, more so than the movie, Although I'm hesitant to say more so than literature, to an extent, is that you participate in it. And I think the thing with literature is that you're forced to participate. I feel like it's even much more in your voice as you read, and you have more time to digest the bits of it in literature. So I'm a little hesitant there, but definitely in a movie where you're simply the observer. In the video game, you're the observer and the participant. You have to enact action or change. Now, of course, this is not just video games in general any more than it's movies in general or literature in general. But we're talking about the ability to have a takeaway message that informs and instills a feeling of progress or understanding or growth from an interaction. Video games can do it just as easily as a movie or a good piece of literature.
So go ahead, play your video games, but don't let it keep you from enjoying other facets of life.
Yeah, and we're not talking about Candy Crush or the Farmville thing or whatever. That's not...
We're saying in comparison to other media. That doesn't mean in comparison to real life.
But what is real life, Blair, anyway?
Interacting with human beings.
But why is that preferential?
It's not preferential. It's also necessary.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you tell that to the bookworms and the movie geeks.
Yeah, they
tell
still
them
have
to
to,
go
at
make a
some
real
point,
friend.
go talk to a person.
I'm hanging out with people while playing my video game.
Yeah. You still are going to need social skills.
It's just the basics. Not really well-developed ones. That's what's great about video games. You don't have to wear pants.
Video games are great. And considering that there are people that spend all day, every day at a computer doing work also, there's just overall, there is definitely less face-to-face, real-life human interaction. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I just wanted to make sure. I just wanted to make sure that there was a kind of a disclaimer that this was in relation to other media, not in relation to all other activities in life, because those are two very different things. That's all I'm saying, is that it should still be tempered with other things. It's not like you can get everything you would ever need from a video game.
Oh no, there's certainly some things that are not possible through a video game. Yes. But neither are they possible through a movie or a book.
Correct, but you're a lot less likely, I think, overall, at least today, you are less likely to read a book for 3 days and never leave your house than you are to do that with a video game. We've all done it, but I think it's less habit forming and it's less likely. And it probably happens a lot more with video games than it does with books or movies. Well,
today, but not throughout history. I think that's the point, though. I think that part of that point is here's the media that's replacing books as the sort of mass escape. Movies pretty well replaced books for a culture, movies and television.
Right.
You have video games not really replacing books. They're replacing movies and television.
Yeah.
Look what they're up against. Look what video games are up against.
That's fine.
Up against the toughest, the toughest thing to.
You can try to mold my words all you want, but you know what I meant.
No, I don't know what you meant. I don't know what you meant.
I meant that in today, with this day and age with the internet and things, it's a lot easier to never leave your house. You used to have to leave your house to go to the grocery store. You don't have to do that now. You can order on Grubhub or something and never leave your house, potentially. So I think it's easier now to indulge in these things to an extreme extent. And so I agree, if you're picking an hour and watching a movie or TV or an hour in a video game, that's what this study has shown, is that the video game has some benefits as compared with the movie or the TV, but that you still have to do other things. It's not saying that you get all your life skills from...
Wait, you have to do other things in order to what?
In order to get sunlight so that you have nutrients that you need for your body, in order to interact with other humans, to get stimulus to those areas of your body.
Doesn't provide light.
Yes, but I'm saying that it's a lot easier to sit and play a video game for a week than to sit and watch TV for a week. Because it's stimulating, because of what you said. It's stimulating in a way that a movie is not, and so it's easier to make that more of a focus than movies can be. So games have their merit, but there's also merits to physical activity with humans.
Oh, with humans? Like what?
Like go for a hike.
Okay. Okay.
Anyway, I have one more story, and it's getting late. I wanted to talk about bats and white nose syndrome, which, if you don't know a lot about white nose syndrome, it's a fungus that has been showing up on bats, and it started in New York City in the early 2000s and has spread its way across pretty much the entire US. It has decimated bat populations. Some species have, or some caves have lost more than 90% of the bats in the cave. And this is, many scientists call it the gravest threat to bats ever seen. It's this fungus that shows up on the bat's nose and in their ears, and it happens when they're hibernating in the cave. It is highly contagious, so it spreads really fast to the entire group of bats in the cave, and usually they don't come back from hibernation. They die when they have this fungus still in hibernation. And so their lowered body temperature is believed to have something to do with its ability to grab onto the bats and having the immune system not fight back. So it took a long time to figure out what this was. And then they figured out it was this fungus, but they have had no cure for years and years now. And the only thing that they can do is when they identify a cave that has white nose syndrome in it, they can try to quarantine it from other bats. And they have people they have spelunkers who go into caves for research or for recreation, doing extreme cleaning procedures when they exit any cave before they enter a new cave. Basically, that's the only way that they can find to prevent this thing from spreading. Well, new research has shown that a bacteria that naturally hangs out on bats' wings could combat white nose syndrome. So this came out of UC Santa Cruz, and they isolated this bacteria and they experimented with it, treating bats with the bacteria, and they saw a great reduction in mortality. So after this laboratory study, now they're hoping to take this bacteria, essentially turn it into a spray, and just spray it on hibernating bats in the hopes that the fungus won't spread, won't grow, and that they'll wake up out of hibernation and be totally fine. So in the lab, it suppressed the fungal growth for more than 35 days, which could be enough to get these bats out of hibernation so that they can survive. So this is the first big discovery in this white nose syndrome process. So hopefully field tests will work. We'll be able to start inoculating bats by basically just spraying this bacteria all over them. And then they'll be able to survive the white nose syndrome when it comes to them. What's also interesting is in their original set of tests, they had bats that were touching each other that had white nose syndrome, and then they had bats that were next to each other with a screen in between them. And it appears to only spread when they can actually physically touch each other, and it's not airborne. So that's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that, and then on top of that, potentially this bacteria, this naturally occurring bacteria, maybe being able to stop these guys from spreading the white nose syndrome. That would be a huge a huge, huge amount of progress in this white nose syndrome collapse. In fact, it's been collapsing these bats so fast that it's been shown to have a lot of similarities to colony collapse syndrome in honeybees. It's been shown to have very similar percentages and numbers, which is crazy. That's huge. And these are 2 pollinators, guys. Bees and bats are both pollinators. So this is important stuff. So fingers crossed on this bacterial spray for bats.
And I believe that brings us to the end of tonight's broadcast.
Yes. I would like to shout out to everyone supporting us on Patreon. I was not able to load the list today.
Regardless of what your name is, where you're from, what you do for a living.
We love you all. Thank you for your support. If you're interested in supporting us, you can find information at patreon.com/thisweekinscience. That's patreon.com/thisweekinscience. Also, remember that you can help us out just by telling your friends about TWIS. Everybody tell somebody else that doesn't know about us, about our silly show, silly/informative show. And we would love for more and more and more minions to hear about all of the amazing science that happens every week. On next week's show, once again, we will be broadcasting live online at 8 p.m. Pacific time on twis.org/live, where you can watch and join our chat room. But don't worry if you can't make it. You can find our past episodes at youtube.com/thisweekinscience or twis.org.
Thank you, everybody, for enjoying the show. TWIS is also available as a podcast. Just Google This Week in Science in your iTunes directory, and we should show up. We also, if you got the mobile device, we are there with the TWIS for Droid app in the Android thingy, or the This Week in Science app in the Apple Marketplace. Also, it's the, if you go into the podcast thing, to the iPhone podcast directory, you got to put in This Week in Science to find us. There's an Apple TV where there's like a YouTube connection through our YouTube thing, which is also This Week in Science.
We're everywhere.
We are everywhere.
For more information on anything you've heard here today, show notes will be available on our website, www.twis.org, where you can also make comments and start conversations with the hosts as well as other listeners.
Or if that's not good enough, you can contact us directly. Email Kirsten at thisweekinscience.com, Justin at twistminion@gmail.com, or Blair at blairbaz@twis.org. Just simply put TWIS, TWIS, somewhere in the subject line, or your email will be spam filtered into oblivion. You can also hit us up on the Twitter, where we are at TWIS Science, at Dr. Kiki, at Jackson's Fly, and at Blair's Menagerie. We love your feedback. If there's a topic you would like us to cover or address, a suggestion for an interview, a haiku that comes to you in the night, please let us know.
We'll be back here next week, and we hope you'll join us again for some more great science news.
And if you have learned anything from today's show, remember,
it's all in your head.
This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science is the end of the world, so I'm setting up shop, got my banner unfurled. It says the scientist is in, I'm gonna sell my advice. Show them how to stop the robots with a simple device. I'll reverse global warming with a wave of my hand, and all it'll cost you is a couple of grand. 'Cause this week's science is coming your way, so everybody listen to what I say. I use the scientific method for all that it's worth, and I'll broadcast my opinion all over the earth. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 I've got one disclaimer, and it shouldn't be news, that what I say may not represent your views, but I've done the calculations and I've got a plan. If you're listen to the science, you may just yet understand that we're not trying to threaten your philosophy. We're just trying to save the world from jeopardy. And this week in science is coming your way. So everybody listen to everything we say. And if you use our method instead of rolling a die, we may rid the world of toxoplasma. Got the cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 I've got a laundry list of items I want to address, from stopping global hunger to dredging Loch Ness. I'm trying to promote more rational thought, and I'll try to answer any question you've got. But how can I ever see the changes I seek when I can only set up shop 1 hour a week? This Week in Science is coming your way. You better just listen to what we say, and if you've learned anything from the words that we said, then please just remember it's all in your head. Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in 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 Science.
We made it. In case any of you are wondering where Kiki is, she moved to Portland over the weekend, and I guess she's under a bunch of boxes. Didn't make it. I don't know if her internet didn't make it or if the computer didn't make it out of its box, but you can imagine moving to Portland is a pretty intense undertaking. So I wish her the very best in her move, hope that it works out all right. And I hope we did okay without her. I know I was hoping that she would be here, but it was still pretty fun, even without the good doctor. I wanted to, let's see. In the after show was going to mention a couple of things. Let's see. So they had this really awesome story that broke earlier this week.
Hey, good
about
show, Blair.
Yeah, good show. Here it is. So there's an octopus in New Zealand, in Sea Life Aquarium in Auckland, New Zealand, that has been trained to take pictures of visitors at the aquarium, which is pretty funny. So they put this camera in this casing outside of the tank, and then they had this kind of chamber on the inside of the tank that pushed a lever that pushed a rod down that took a picture. And so the octopus got to wait until people were in the camera, in the shot, and then Rambo the octopus was trained to take pictures of visitors from inside her tank, and then they were able to sell the pictures to those people who got their picture taken by an octopus. But it's pretty good octopus enrichment. It's pretty good people enrichment, and the pictures are only $2 in New Zealand dollars, with proceeds going towards the organization's conservation programs. Apparently, it only took her 3 attempts for her to understand the process. So the article says that's faster than a dog. In fact, that's faster than a human in some cases. So that's pretty fun. An octopus is taking pictures. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I know, Salty Hash. I did call it 2 weeks ago that Kiki wouldn't be here. My goodness. Justin, you have anything to discuss?
I do, but I don't have the tools with which to discuss it.
Okay.
I would like to play for everybody. Okay, so Ted Cruz brought an astronaut panel before the Senate to talk about what they thought the future of NASA should be. And the beginning of it was there was Buzz Aldrin, right? He brought a panel of astronauts to discuss it. Not the engineers, not scientists, not people who are looking to the new frontier. He brought people who've been to space and asked them, what should the future of space of NASA be? And of course they said, we want more people in space. They're astronauts. And then it was followed by a series of basically contractors. Like there was like Boeing describing what they thought the future of NASA should be. So what it's going to be is Ted Cruz is going to say, like, I conferred with people at NASA about what the future of space exploration should be, and they said we should be focused on men in space. Yeah. It was kind of ridiculous, but the takeaway thing from it, and this it's available on C-SPAN still. It's pretty recent C-SPAN. Actually, if you look up, the best thing to do is go to C-SPAN and Google Buzz Aldrin in their little search, and then put it to the most recent, because it's his most recent stint, Capitol Hill. And Buzz goes off the deep end, like continually through this. And that Buzz Aldrin apparently has the plan all worked out. He's got it all penciled out on this conveyor belt, revolving rockets going left, right, and center, that we could take people to Mars, bring them back again, be dropping off supplies, take people over to the moon, drop them off there. It's got this whole thing. And while it was supposed to be, I think, this sort of Ted Cruz formal, do you think people should go to space so we can stop funding global warming research aspects of NASA? Buzz Aldrin kind of attempted to co-opt the whole event to pitch. This was his opportunity to pitch Buzz Aldrin's galactic network of trams, I guess is the best way to put it. It's a little bit of a fun watch. If you can, it's 2 hours altogether. But if you can watch the first half with Buzz Aldrin, every time when it's his turn to speak, pitching our solar system's first monorail. Monorail. I got it all worked out. This makes sense on paper. I had some scientists help me. Our researchers. We penciled it out. We can do this.
Monorail.
It is. It's so the monorail page. Simpsons. It's amazing. And he's a dear, sweet old man who had tons of courage to do something that most sane people wouldn't have done.
Aha.
Courage beyond the pale,
right,
as an astronaut. But not a scientist. Really not in NASA. Not part of NASA. Not part of NASA's mission for the last 40, 50 years or whatever it's been. It's just not. So and I watched this thing in absolute abject terror, knowing what Ted Cruz's objective was, how he's going to use this little sit down in the future, and the fact that the head of NASA wasn't there. None of the heads of NASA were there. Nobody who's actively working on the missions of NASA was there to defend or rebuke. What's his name? He's a friend of the show. I think he's been on the show. The astronaut. I think he's a UCD astronaut. God, names escape me. It's part of my brain that never formed. But he did point out, and what was I was like get on the edge of my seat as he's talking about the most dramatic thing he witnessed in his experience as an astronaut was looking back at the Earth, realizing that this thing is so precious. I mean, this is where we all actually live. This is our home. There it is, the one blue planet in our solar system that supports life, and this is where we are. And didn't go further, saying, you know, part of the mission of NASA has to be involved in preserving this. But it's also kind of interesting. There's also a side show you can kind of watch. And I don't know exactly who these people are. I think they're interns. They're staffers. The folks sitting behind the senators on the panel, you know, they're always back there and they're talking to each other and they're whispering. They're looking over there and it's like, oh, there's that guy. We got to go talk to him. We're like, here's this note I got. Here's a text message. Here's a picture I saw. Look at this video I found on YouTube. Like they're like active in the background, right? And while the astronauts are talking, they're all like distracted. Like none of them are paying attention. They're all, you know, engaged in some sort of whatever busy activity you could be doing in the background of a Senate hearing like this. But as soon as the head of the head liaison from Boeing is sitting there, they're interested in what he has to say. They aren't distracted. So this was all very disturbing.
Science Island?
Say what? Now you're talking my language again, girl. What's going on? Science Island? What's that?
Just, you know, Ted Cruz. Thinking about him just makes me want to go to Science Island.
I'm telling you, Science Island is where it's at. Science Island. You got to join the conversation. It's going on tomorrow night again.
I know, but you guys, I'm busy.
I know. So am I. I don't have time for it.
Ugh.
We've got it pretty much drilled down, Blair.
Okay.
We're really close. We're getting closer and closer. We've figured out what the minimum constraints are, what we actually need versus and what's possible. We're getting into that realm of, well, how far away would this concept actually be?
Yeah. I don't know. There won't be a zoo anywhere near there, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to come.
Well,
I'll be able to visit.
We don't know. We don't know the where. So this is one of the things we talked about. We talked about scale. This is one of the big focuses, because there was the cheapest real estate you can get for the, you know, per acre is also the biggest. That's when you're talking like we can get a couple 100 acres for less than 200,000. But it's not near anything. So then we become subsistence farmers day one, which isn't a good scene.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's other scenarios. There's one that's actually not far from here. A little bit north of where I am. 15-minute drive. It's like 10 acres.
Well, that's probably near the Sac Zoo.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Total striking distance to universities, to zoos, to even if you want to be part of the commuter scene, you could go all the way to the Bay. You could do all sorts of things with it. But it's like 10 acres. It's a fraction of what we first envisioned the territory to be. But really, how much do we actually need? Maybe not that much. One of the things I've tapped into earlier is that, okay, the problem is that you can't do the Earthship biotexture in California. But you can do shipping containers. And there's a way that you could back berm a shipping container to replicate much of the benefits of the Earthship. So then you're just using it as the structure within what would otherwise be, the Earthship biotexture. So there's like some pretty interesting things that we've thought of.
Well, that's exciting. I still want to go to Haida Gwaii. I'm still gonna.
You want to go where? Oh yeah.
I'm convinced that's gonna be my next extravagant trip.
I'm not going. I had a tsunami dream last night. It was too much. Too much.
I want to be in
Okay, so here's my dream.
Like
giant. My dream is just cruising along, just kind of casual. It's like a bunch of people. Like, you know how it is in a dream. You run into people you met in your past, people who came and went. Some of them are dead, some are alive. It's just faces you recognize, people you know. Everybody though is at this beach. And I did tie in. I know what triggered the dream. Super windy around here this morning, all throughout the day. Super windy day. So the wind's going like whoosh, out the window, right? In my dream, that translated into the tide going out, but not just out, but like way out on this beach. I mean, we're all at the beach, and then the water just recedes like 100 yards out. It just goes. And I know the only way that happens, tsunami's coming. So I'm trying to tell everybody, that's a tsunami. Tsunami, get it, run, go. Everybody. And like some people are going and some aren't. So I gather up my small people. And I start running, and I'm running to the car. I throw it into the car. Nobody's even belted in this dream. I'm taking off, driving. And I'm like, wow, that water went way out. What are the chances that I'm going to be able to outrun this thing? Like, how fast does the tsunami waters come? Like, if I go 80, am I ahead of it? Is that not fast enough? I don't even know. So then I start looking for higher ground, and I start going, okay, it's not as important to get further away. It's more important to go to higher ground. So I think this dream is informed. I think I want to put Science Island on the top of a hill. Like a pretty decent one. So now that's my qualification. I'm narrowing it down to somewhere in the neighborhood of.
Well, you're going to be farther from water then, probably.
20 acres. Not necessarily. 10, 20 acres with a little bit of elevation. Now, there's a huge mountain ridge or large hill ridge between the Central Valley and the coast. All right? So somewhere there. Let's look for 20 acres in Mendocino. Does that work?
Sounds good to me.
All right.
Mendocino's gorgeous.
Okay. So you're in. So the other thing I did was I said, one thing that would take us a step closer is if I dedicated the possible potential future TWIS cut to the island.
Your TWIS cut.
Yeah, well, yeah, mine. So if you want, I'm just saying, if you want the bug out place to get built properly, Blair, this is all you gotta do is kick that in. I think we're like halfway there.
Who will pay my student loans?
Who needs this? Who cares? You're gonna be living rent free, right? Most of your food will be produced. You won't have bills. You won't have to pay an electric bill, this bill or that. You won't have any bills. Why do you got to pay anybody? Rich people don't pay stuff back. Neither do people who don't have bills.
Well, but I will have bills because I already went to school. I owe that money.
Blair, let me tell you, this is a little secret about the student loan. Nobody pays them back. It's sort of like
That's not true.
That is true. It's sort of like, it is true. It's sort of like when you get a bill from the hospital, you just ignore it. Because our society understands.
You're going to be in jail.
No, you don't go to jail. No, this is not how this works. When you go to get a loan for a house or a car and they say you had $200,000 in unpaid medical bills, you know what they say? Oh, it's medical bills. Okay, we'll ignore it.
You're
they ignore
crazy.
They ignore it because it's like that. It's like it doesn't count. It's like an act of God. There's
You're
no way.
an
They
insane
understand. Banks
person.
understand the health industry is broken. They've been ignoring medical debt for decades.
You're why my medical bills are so high.
Me?
Yeah, for
I've
not
never been
paying
sick.
your
I've never
medical
had time
bills.
to be sick. I never had time to be sick.
People
At
not
some
paying
point.
medical bills is why medical bills are so high.
Well, not me. I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about my. I'm just talking about my experience in the car industry.
Okay,
And
well,
when
I'll
I've
tell
had
you right
someone
now,
where
people
that looks like
on their
they're
medical bills is why they're so
devastatingly
high.
upside down in debt because of student loans and medical bills. The banks look like at that as if those things didn't exist. Now, you didn't pay back a credit card. You had a car repossessed. You did something foolish like that. Oh, forget you.
So the only reason you pay for goods and services is you're worried you'll get in trouble for not paying for goods and services? Is that what you're telling me?
I think that's how our system works. The other one is housing. Housing. If you had
What a horrible
house
way to live life.
taken from you 10 years ago, couldn't get a car loan.
See,
There's
this
no
whole
way.
conversation,
You let a house
Justin.
go. What are you going to do about just a car?
This whole
Since then,
conversation.
It fell into the act of God category. You lost a house? Oh, great. Your debt to income ratio is better. You don't have all that debt dragging around behind you. Yeah, we'll give you a car loan. No problem.
I don't want a car. My point is that people not paying when they have been given goods and services is why this stuff costs so much. And so by not paying those things, you are part of the problem.
No.
So that's not a valid argument for you to tell
I
me,
think it's an act of
you
activism.
don't have to
not
pay your
fake
student
practice.
loans.
I don't
Nobody
think anybody
cares.
should ever pay their student loans. I would say nobody should ever pay back the student loans.
I agree with you, but that's not the country we live in.
Well, it was, though, and it should be again,
it's
and
not
it should
now.
be a lesson to those who seek to profit from exploiting what was once, at one point, free in this country. It used to be in California. If you went to a state university and you were a resident of California, you didn't pay.
Yeah, well,
To a community college, it was free.
that's not how the world works now.
It's not how it works now because it was co-opted by people who saw profit in it. And I say, best way to right back at you, don't pay your student loans. Nobody should ever pay their student loans.
Oh my
Paying
God.
a
You're an
student
insane
loan-
person. You're an insane person.
Yeah. To me, paying a student loan is like going through the self-checkout at a grocery store. You know that used to be somebody's job, and yet you're willing to go work for them for free. You're paying for something that you should not have to pay for. Your tax dollars should be paying for this.
Someone not paying their student loans is why tuition is higher.
No, it isn't. That has nothing to do with it.
Yeah,
That is
because you're picking up other
that's
people's
what they would
slack.
like you to think, but that has nothing to do
Oh
with
my
it.
God. You're
Nothing.
infuriating. You're absolutely infuriating.
Good night, replicant.
Oh my God. Okay. It's late.
All right. I'll see you tomorrow night. Try to show up by 9 o'clock.
Yeah, I'm probably not going to be there tomorrow night.
You've got to. Otherwise, I'm
film
going to
screening tomorrow night.
Well, we'll still let you into Science Island, even if you haven't contributed to it in advance. Because unlike you, we believe there's some things that are just right and just wrong in this world. Don't pay your student loans, people. It's a trap.
What? Don't listen to that.
It's a trap.
What an insane thing to say. Because now student loans aren't federal anymore. They outsource them to agencies, and then not paying your student loans is like not paying a credit card, and they call a collections agency on you.
Mm-hmm.
My student loans are now in a private company's hands.
Right. Okay. So here's the other thing you need to understand, Blair. In case you don't. In case you don't understand, let me explain this. Let me explain this to anybody who's ever had a debt collector. Okay? Call them. So your student loans are, I'm just going to make up a number. I'm going to say $10,000. The private company that now currently owns that debt, Blair, didn't pay $10,000 for that debt. That was sold to them for pennies on the dollar. They may have bought it for 50 cents on the dollar. They may have bought it for 25 cents on the dollar. They may have even only bought it for 18 cents on the dollar. And the longer you go without paying, the more times it'll be sold. And each time it's sold for a smaller amount. So, yeah, at some point, you'll pay some junk bond company who's been holding on to your student debt. Actually, I haven't been holding on to it. They just got it. And they're like the 8th private debt collector company that's designed to just make money off of other people's debt and doesn't actually produce any wealth in this world. And they'll have bought it for 12 cents, maybe 8 cents on the dollar. And you'll say to them, look, I know I owe $10,000, but I tell you what, if you're willing to settle up the entire amount for $800 right now, I will send you this money. And they'll actually have a profit margin in there because they actually bought it for 6 cents on the dollar. And that's when you pay. You don't pay any time before then.
That's... You're just,
you know what makes me
living in a fantasy world. You're living in a fantasy world, Justin. We're in a capitalist society, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Here's a true story. Had a Capital One card at a point in my life when I lost a job that I did not expect to lose. The company downsized massively. It's a good job, whatever. I had this credit card. And I called my credit card people, and I was like, look, I'm going to need like some time, blah, 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 blah. And this particular credit card company was, the person I talked to at least was like, nope, you got to pay it, whatever. I'm like, okay. But I managed to do all my other debt and structure everything else. And everybody else who worked with me and everything else I owed, I managed to pay. But that one I didn't. And I didn't. And then at some point I started getting, they've sent it to they're the only ones that I got sent to a debt collector. And it went through several debt collectors. And each one that it went to, the number went down a little bit less. Went down, went down, went down. Now, meantime, of course, I've got the job again. I'm reestablishing credit, but I still never paid that one. And I was just kind of getting curious, like, how low will it go? Now I'm at, like, they're asking for, like, an 1/8 of what it initially was. And I could pay it, but I'm like, I don't really need to. It's not even on the credit anymore. It's been so long. The company that initially had offered me that I initially had that credit card with, sends me an offer for a credit card. And I take it. So I have an active credit card with this company that I defaulted on their credit card, and somebody who they sold the thing to, who bought it from somebody, who bought it from somebody, who bought it from somebody, still trying to collect. But that company doesn't care. They offered me further credit. The credit system is ridiculous.
Well, for every one of you, there's probably 100 people who got stuck in a real bad situation with their credit card.
Yeah, no, I don't doubt it, but I think also.
So I think it's really dangerous to encourage people to not pay their credit.
I would pay your credit cards because actually it hurt my credit for a while.
Yeah,
pretty badly.
Do you ever want to buy a house or a car?
Yeah,
or get a good job?
However, I would suggest, and this is the monkey wrench gang within me, I would suggest that you rack up as much educational debt as possible and don't pay a penny of it now. Because until the industry that's feeding off of increased costs of education and is profiting even more so than the educational system itself, until that system is broken, we will never have free education in this nation. And that's what we need to have.
That's asinine. First of all, if you sign something that said you will pay a certain amount, you pay that. because you're an honest person and you agreed to it. That's the number one and most important part, is that if everybody does what they say they'll do, things will work a lot better. And if I signed a piece of paper that said that I will pay this money back, I am going to pay it back because I am an honest person.
I understand that the game was rigged before you got in.
And I knew about that getting into it. I'm not a dumb person.
Take you for twice
about it.
What you had owed. And that's why you don't pay your student loans.
So, first of all, I completely disagree with you because I signed a piece of paper that said that I would pay it. Okay. So that's the first.
What were your other options?
To not go to school, to work more jobs.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But it was my choice and I signed it. Now,
Blair, if you had happened to have been born into an affluent family,
yeah, I
would you have had to take high interest rates on your education?
I probably wouldn't have had to take any sort of loan at all.
No, you wouldn't have.
But the point is
your higher education led to paying more taxes? Yes. So really the money that could have just been invested in you from day one, you already paid back by earning more than you would have without an education. But for some reason, there's this other entity who, through lobbyists, politicians, have convinced us, not me, maybe you, that there should be an additional payment on top of taxation for your education.
All right.
So your education wasn't actually good for the nation in the first place.
My not paying doesn't do anything to the system.
Yeah, it does.
What would do something to the system is working with fellow people in my society to demand change. Me not paying just gets me punished. That doesn't do anything to the system. In fact, in the long run, if I ever end up paying it back, I will end up paying it at a higher income rate, and then other governmental agencies will take more money from me as a result to that.
Unless
that's not helping anything.
Unless you find yourself off the grid and aren't paying the rent thing, aren't paying twice
I want
the
to
value
stay in
of a home on a
America
mortgage,
because that's where my family lives.
3 times.
And I want to work at a zoo, which requires me living in a city. So those two things mean I'm not going off the grid. Plus, if I want to change the system, the entire country is not going to go off the grid. So once again, that doesn't help change the system.
Fieldo, we are all becoming slaves to debt. Think for yourself. Question authority. First of all, always question authority. Question why authority is an authority in the first place and why it's telling you what it's telling you, because chances are the reason it sought to be in a position of authority was so it could tell you stuff that was bullshit. Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, I think it's time to go because you're swearing.
What? How am I swearing? Where did I say? You said hippo poo and I can't say bullshit?
That's correct. You can't.
All right. Good night, everybody.
All right.
Don't pay your student loans.
Oh, Lord. TWIS does not condone the idea to not pay off debt.
This aspect of TWIS does condone the non-payment of repayment of student loans.